Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives. We are so stoked you're here, and you're going to be pretty stoked too. We have a very special guest coming up, Jason van Tatenhove, a writer, and you might know him from his appearance in front of the January 6th committee hearings. He is a former publicist for the Oath Keepers. He gave us an incredible, very insightful interview, and we are very grateful for him. So please stay tuned for that. All right. You guys know who I am. Heidi Cuda, investigative reporter, Jim Stewartson, filmmaker, producer, disinformation sleuth, hi-fi, badass data sleuth, and a newsie. And away we go. Let's jump right into Front Loaded.
Front Loaded.
That, of course, is the beautiful work of our friend Sean Connor. Okay, so mental anguish is the first thing I want to talk about. I've been focused on something that Jim brought up in our last Rad Pod and Chill. It really resonated with me where Jim was talking about how people who've been radicalized are actually in pain or mental anguish when people are confronting them with facts. And I wrote a thread about it. It was very popular considering how much harassment we take on Twitter. And I just wanted to draw people's attention to it because we are losing the de-radicalization effort. And Jim offered some very beautiful advice. And I'm a big believer, and Jason van Tatenhove, our upcoming guest, agrees that making fun of people is not helpful. Jim, what can you say about this?
Well, cognitive dissonance is created by trauma and undue influence, which we're going to talk about, I believe, and it causes literal mental pain. And the euphemism is cognitive dissonance, right? Which is, it sounds like, oh, your brain's a little fuzzy. That's not it at all. It's painful. When you see people who are confused and distraught when things happen that don't fit into their narrative. In my documentary, I have a woman who is just completely traumatized by the fact that Joe Biden is president. Just doesn't make any fucking sense to her at all. And, a lot of people's reaction is to make fun of people like that. And it is exactly the wrong thing to do. And, it's hard not to. I understand. And I've certainly done it, been guilty of it myself.
Sure.
But generally speaking, what we need to do is understand that what they're feeling is real to them. It's just as real as what you're feeling. And they're going through pain. And as hard as it is sometimes, we have to have compassion.
Thank you for that. And I think that is going to be something we are going to continue to talk about and expose further in upcoming episodes. So story number 2, quantifying online harms. A patron of the show, a dear friend of mine, sent me a report on the economic cost of bad actors on the internet. And this was a report from 2019, and it looked at the economic impacts of fake news. And it called it a $78 billion problem. This friend of mine is going to be revisiting this challenge and also really highlighting and focusing on the impacts on journalists and independent journalists such as ourselves. And I asked him to please try to quantify the unseen impacts, the mental trauma, the suicides. I think we do need to keep talking about digital empathy, which is something that Avita March, our guest from episode 35, talked about. We did learn a lot from her. But I think, yes, we can talk about economic impacts, but there are profoundly damaging psychological impacts that I think are going to be a bit more difficult to quantify, but I would like an attempt to be made.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine the amount of lost work. Like, if you want, just talking about financial impacts, right?
Yeah.
From people who've been brainwashed, right? Who have cognitive dissonance and don't know how to run their life except for by going to Telegram or, whatever propaganda channel that they feed on. All of that energy is taken away from family, friends, anything productive. Not to mention any, economic output.
Right.
So, I cannot imagine what the 2020 effects of, COVID plus the explosion of disinformation that happened
Yes.
in 2020. I add a zero or something to whatever it was in 2019.
Wow. Yeah. No, I think another thing that our viewers are going to learn when they listen to our interview with Jason is when his name appeared in the first press release that was attached to an Oath Keepers release, he was fired from his job and then made more money as a publicist for the Oath Keepers than he'd ever made. So we need to talk about the economic impacts and also the economic opportunities of propaganda and internet trolling versus what lack of options there may be for some people out there. Like we've got to really, we talk about this too. During the New Deal, writers were funded. Arthur Miller was supported as a playwright. He wrote Death of a Salesman. We need Joe Biden to be looking at that program and thinking about how we can fund writers, artists, musicians during this time, because I dare say many of our frenemies, putting out disinformation, are probably doing it because that's where they're making money. Hi-fi.
Follow the money. And right now, those who are against liberal democracy have all the ducats.
Yeah, I mean, we'll
Yes,
see.
it's going to be very
Look,
interesting for our viewers to hear.
I swear the sanctions are going to kick in on some of this bullshit out there. I mean, because ultimately,
Mhm.
where it's coming from. Now, there's plenty of very, very rich Americans who are willing to step in the gap. But
Yeah,
assuming that Putin does not succeed in taking over Eurasia, which is what he wants to do, it's going to be harder times for people who been feeding out of that trough.
right. I look forward to that, and I also hope that we are ready for the increase in the unemployed ex psychological terrorists. Like we have to be having these conversations, which I'm very glad about. That I was sent that economic cost of bad actors because I think it's going to be something that's very important to continue to put in front of people. All right. Lastly, I would like to draw our viewers' attention to Jim and Hi-Fi's discussion about Anonymous and the backstory to online harms culture. You guys are bona fide historians, and we can't fight a war we do not understand. Pitiful how it's the same group that keeps perpetuating these harms against humanity. We keep on going back to the same people. They keep on making appearances, but I encourage everybody to please listen to it. It's incredibly important, insightful, and very useful tutorial on the times in which we live, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I was just along for the ride. It was the Hi-Fi show, and it was fucking glorious. I mean, it was dark material, but Hi-Fi was there from the start. I was too, but in a different lane. He was there in the fucking trenches at the beginning, and that story is really important because basically what we're seeing now is just a perfected version of what happened back then.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, hold.
it's evolved. It went from a bunch of kids playing on the internet to a bunch of young men who have now been weaponized and are being
Yeah,
used as soldiers
yeah.
in a digital insurgency.
I do not think we can understand the war that is right in front of us if we don't understand the origin story. And that was a really great look at the origin story. So thank you both. I was
Of
super
course.
proud of you. All
I
right.
hope
So,
people get it.
well, it starts by putting out the information. Okay. So let us go to word phrase of the week, Hi-Fi.
All right. So our word phrase of the week this week is well, it's undue influence. But here's the thing: undue influence, by influence by which a person is induced to act otherwise than by their own free will, or without adequate attention to the consequences. And I would say that we've seen quite a bit of evidence of this. Let's talk about the death of Ashley Babbitt. Let's talk about the death of the Cincinnati FBI shooter. Let's talk about the death of the individual who smashed his car into the Capitol at 4 a.m. last night.
Let's talk about the 85%.
Well, hold on. I'm not done, because there's even
Sorry.
more. Let's talk about the parents who were driven mad and murdered their children. If that's not a sign of undue influence that a normal person would not engage in, I don't know what is.
You're talking specifically in that case about QAnon impacts. That was the story
So
directly related to QAnon.
those are extreme examples of what happens when people are under the effects of undue influence. Undue influence is a more modern term for what used to be called brainwashing, and still is. It is a real phenomenon in which people literally live in a different reality than you and I do. That is what it means. The undue influence can be the people who are killing their children, but it can also be the 85% of Republicans who don't believe that Joe Biden is a legitimate president.
Perfect.
That's undue influence. Those are lies. That is the effect of cumulative coercive propaganda on people who have now been programmed, frankly, to believe lies. And that is the intentional result of Fox and Telegram and all of these fucking propaganda channels that are creating undue influence in people's minds. And so we need to, and it goes back to our cognitive dissonance question before, when you have undue influence, when you are presented with reality in a confrontational way, it creates cognitive dissonance. It's trauma. The undue influence is caused by trauma. And so what happens is you are brought back into that traumatic state when somebody confronts you with something that doesn't fit your reality, and it hurts. And that's why we talk about the compassion you need to have, that you need to give people an opportunity to find themselves out, but you can't force it. You can't argue them out of it. What you have to do is be there for them as they figure it out.
Yes. Wow. Well, I am very appreciative to the things that we do on this show and how much it expands my own mind and makes my work, makes me better at my job. So thank you so much for that. Let's move on to why it matters. High five.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? By High Fidelity.
All right. Our first story this week is the world is burning.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a picture of the Danube. As you can see, it is incredibly, incredibly low. Mm-hmm. This is a picture of the River Loire in France. This is the Rhine in Germany. Mm-hmm. This is a river.
Wow.
The Wal River in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
This is what is left of the River Po, which is the mm-hmm. largest river in Italy. A World War II bomb was discovered and exploded in the River Po.
Wow.
And this is the River Thames mm-hmm. right now. Mm-hmm. This is what the Danube looks like. Mm-hmm. And the reason I bring this up, we've been fed disinformation for decades by petroleum companies.
Mm-hmm.
Climate change was not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
We are being told right now that this is a once in 500-year event,
Mm-hmm.
except the last time some of these rivers were this low was in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fast 500 years.
We've been lied to. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. We've been lied to, and our planet is paying the price, and ultimately humanity will pay the price for their disinformation. And that's why it matters.
Yes,
Absolutely. We've said this
oil
many
and gas
times.
industry has funded an enormous amount of disinformation, which is why this is incredibly relevant. It
Yes.
is the amount of money that has been poured into Christofascism and a whole bunch of other stuff that seems unrelated to oil and gas, but actually isn't.
Yeah,
the reason
that's right.
is, and I'll say this one more time, is because it's all about apocalyptic ideology where the end goal is chaos and death. That's what that is the lie that they're pushing on people, is that actually, no, the end times are good because Jesus is going to come down in magic carpet. And that lie, the extreme version of it, has been funded by a shitload of the people who are responsible for those rivers.
And yes, obviously the fight that we're in is part of this fossil fuel dominionist Kremlin, triangle. I do want to say that all those lives that could have been saved if the tobacco industry never had a seat at the scientific table. We have given the fossil fuel industry a seat at these tables, and they have proven unworthy. And here we are, when you see the Thames, looking like that, one of the most incredibly iconic rivers in the world.
Yeah, the problem is the table that they have a seat at is just a giant oil drum. It's fucking, there's no table except them at this point. So,
I'm visualizing the big table in Doctor Strangelove. All right, Hi-Fi, let's bring us around to something cool, man. Tell us something good, Hi-Fi.
All right, I'm going to tell you something good. Sending aid to Africa, and this is a good thing. And as you know, I like to look at things in a global aspect, and there's been a lot of destabilized governments in Africa. Things are going pretty rough there. But apparently the State Department might be watching our show, because this week Anthony Blinken and the Biden administration delivered a new sub-Saharan strategy that will provide billions for food security, because food security in Africa is very, very poor right now due to the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian conflict.
Yeah.
And, at the best of times, food security is an issue. And now that millions of tons of grain have been stolen by Russia, food security is even worse in Africa. And as we know from our show, depriving people of food, starving people, is one of the best ways to radicalize them and lead them to violence. So the United States doesn't want that. And because of that, we are helping with food security, and we are also helping with financial aid to stabilize democratic governments.
Very important.
Very important. As a matter of fact, even in Mali, the junta government that is currently ruling Mali has agreed to have free and fair elections in 2025. So that's a good sign.
We'll see about it. We'll see about that. Wait till Eric Prince gets back in there, and
Yeah, well, hopefully Eric Prince will be locked up after January 6th when he figures out what he did. Hopefully.
Yes, I thought it was
not so sure about that.
I did think it was a wonderful moment when our guest, Jason van Tatenhove, did mention, in our pre-interview that we must see some of the perpetrators of January 6th at the highest levels actually gain consequences. So obviously I'm excited about our friends seeing that interview. So let's do, thank you for that. Always insightful. I think it's very important that we don't take our eye off of what's happening in Africa for 1 second. So thank you, Hi-Fi, for always bringing the updates. Do we have a Sean's brief legal briefs? Because I got something I want to just bring up real quick.
Yeah, I mean, we're skipping my well, let's bring up my last one real fast. And that's simply stochastic terrorism causes people to short circuit. I think everyone is aware by now of the Cincinnati shooter going after the FBI. I think everyone aware by now of the individual who smashed their car into the Capitol at 4 a.m. and fired shots. And, our good friend Dave Troy has this to say.
Can you read it for our viewers? I think it's really worth reading.
Certainly. It's worth distinguishing between calls for civil war, which are generalized incitement, and coordinated activity, which actually constitutes war. What we are seeing right now is incitement in random individual acts, which is distinctly different in nature and scale. We are facing an insurgency. That's it.
How much do we love Dave Troy?
And I've been fighting this fight with some disinfo mules. Look, the civil war is a distinct possibility for fucking real, but this ain't it. This is a bunch of people who are already radicalized into the Trump cult getting more radicalized because Trump, is getting his bell rung. And yes, it is worth saying that and pointing out that people are turned up, but frankly, it is nothing like January 6th. And the idea that somehow, these random acts of violence are going to cause civil war is just irresponsible. And so all I ever call for is that people, just like Dave said, recognize the difference between random acts of stochastic violence and the kind of organized, funded, paid activity that we saw leading up to January 6th. And conflating those two things is frankly dangerous.
Couldn't agree more. And thank you so much for that. And it is a very important, somewhat nuanced thing that I think we need to keep explaining to people, because the media continues to fail us, and boy, am I looking forward to a guest we have coming in a couple weeks to talk about that. All right, so now we're going to do Sean's brief legal briefs.
Brief legal briefs.
All right. I'm just going to encourage our viewers to read the DOJ Unsealed search warrant and property receipts. Please read it. It's only 7 pages. It'll help you understand hellscape. I circled 2 things: fruits of crime and Roger Jason Stone Jr. And the reason I circled that is everybody knows I believe that pardon fraud occurred. And so I'm very excited to know that there may be some additional investigation into that. And again, don't wait for the disinformation machine to tell you what this is about. Read it for yourself, and then read trusted news sources so you can keep up with what's happening. And that's what I wanted to say about that.
Heck, let's put the link to the PDF in our comments for this video so that people can click on it and read it if they want to. Let's do that. All right.
Sounds good.
Super easy. Very, very important. Yes,
right.
Trump is getting his bell rung. Now on to hellscape, yo.
Jim Stewartson's hellscape. Oh, fuck.
All right, we're going to put Jim in the big box.
I want to talk about Flynn's bad week.
So, Flynn, yes, he's had a bad week, but he didn't give a shit, right? Look, I'm not going to spend long because I want to get to the interview as quickly as possible. But there's a theme here over the last week or so. And it is Mike Flynn and the Russians, along with what's been going on in Trump world, has been very, very eye-opening. There's one person in particular that I've been intentionally paying a lot of attention to, and it is this person, Christina Bobb. Where is she? There she is. Christina Bobb, who was Mike Flynn's lawyer in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So one of the things that people are missing in this whole thing is that Christina Bobsky, as I call her, has been basically working with Flynn for well over a decade, since she was really young and traveling around with Flynn in Afghanistan. So I find it fascinating that she's the one who signed this fucking document right here, and showed up right around the time that the FBI and the DOJ apparently got a source inside of Mar-a-Lago who told them about these boxes with the various classified TSCSI document, which is the highest level of classification you can get. I also am curious what the fuck they have on Macron in this box. That's interesting as well. But the fact that Flynn's person is the one who's basically installed at the Trump compound to either protect the documents or pin them on Trump, I think is a really interesting thing.
Yes.
Additionally, what was in the documents, as we have learned, were nuclear documents, right? Now, the nuclear documents are, by all accounts, not about nuclear weapons. It's nuclear technology, which Flynn was on the phone with Tom Barrack at the inauguration in order to sell nuclear secrets to the Saudis. So that happened at the inauguration. And then my partner Gal Suburban found this, which is the second to last executive order that Donald Trump ever signed, which is about small modular reactors for national defense and space exploration. And the time frame of this thing went out 180 days, meaning Trump thought at this point he was going to stay in the presidency. And he signed something about nuclear reactors. It was really, really strange. Why would he do that? And again, Mike Flynn, whose lawyer is currently down there who was down there with the nuclear documents, Mike Flynn is the one who is trying to sell nuclear secrets to the Saudis. Importantly, it wasn't just the Saudis he was trying to sell nuclear secrets to, because the people that were going to build these nuclear power plants that Flynn was trying to get built in Saudi Arabia was going to be done with Russian contractors, specifically a company called Rosatom. Rosatom is just is Moscow's nuclear contractor, and sadly, for some reason, right now they are not being sanctioned. Maybe there's a reason for that. I don't know what, but I don't know why Rosatom is currently escaping Russian sanctions, considering that they are clearly involved in this overall plan
Right.
to acquire nuclear weapons or nuclear technology from America to distribute to our enemies.
Wow.
And let's be really clear. Saudi Arabia is our enemy. Saudi Arabia financed 9/11 and has been, fucking us around in foreign policy for an extremely long time, and partnered up with Jared Kushner and Donald Trump to finance a whole bunch of the chaos that we've seen recently.
Right.
Remember, Mnuchin got $1 billion from the Saudis as well.
Yes. The Saudis were also in Trump Tower in 2016 and ostensibly financed a lot of the social media influence campaigns that we still see out there to this day.
I would also like to. I also need to bring up the fact that when Parler started, I believe it was 250,000 Saudi Arabian bots were introduced to the Parler network. Just thought I'd bring that up.
Yes, there's all sorts of fuckery. Anyway, I'm not going to belabor this, but if you go to my Substack, there's a whole bunch of stuff where Mike Flynn is just. He has no fucks anymore. He's simply doing Russian propaganda.
I was going to say, this is all Russian propaganda. I mean, everything.
It's all Russian propaganda, period.
Insane.
And one thing I will also note is that Mike Flynn's brother has been hanging around my Substack for over a fucking week now, reading everything I put out and forwarding it to lots of people, presumably his brother and his brother's lawyer. So that should be interesting. At the same time, this motherfucker, Rand Paul, who's been a Russian asset for a decade, and his father a Russian asset for many decades, is just out here just
Assange.
Yeah. Do you love the cute little boyish? But hold on. Do you love the cute little boyish image of Assange too? Looks like a little frolicking 16-year-old. He hasn't looked like that.
Adorable? Russian asset and Pizzagate,
perpetrator.
Creator. Anyway, Rand Paul is out here saying that the Espionage Act should be abolished. In other words, we should have no more fucking spying, right? And he's using this Future of Freedom Foundation to back himself up. And I will just end on this. So the Future of Freedom Foundation has Russian asset and about to be extradited criminal Julian Assange on the front page of the website. Here's the asshole who writes everything.
Yeah.
And here's what he said about Brittany Griner. Only a person who is willfully blind cannot see that the U.S. position on the Brittany Griner case is driven not by some compassionate concern for her welfare, but rather by the extreme anti-Russia animus that has afflicted U.S. officials for more than 75 years. So this is the motherfucker that Rand Paul, to his God knows how many million people follow him, that's who he's promoting.
Yeah.
And that guy needs to not be a senator. He needs to not be a free man.
Yeah.
He needs to go to prison with his co-conspirator, Mitch McConnell, because Kentucky is a failed state. And that is the end of Hellscape.
Thank you. I have a couple things I want to say. I've got 3 quick things. One is that I saw that tweet and I did a screenshot and wrote horse shit and said it read better in its original Russian form. It's straight Russian propaganda. The second thing is, speaking of Christinas who are in the close quarters of, the corrupt individuals in our country, Christina Pushaw is now headed to Ron DeSantis's election campaign. And I think it's important to note because, I don't think we scrutinize the women closely enough, and so I just wanted to point that out. Her history is super sketch. She turned the media into enemy combatants as DeSantis's press secretary, and so again, it's somebody
Well,
who worked for Eastern Bloc presidents and worked for the Koch brothers and having an outsized role in our democracy. Yeah. So, Hi-Fi, I got one more point to make before we move on. What did you want to say?
it strikes me as amazing. It strikes me as amazing that all these political players on the Republican side are tied to weird, strange things, including dirty money in foreign countries, and no one's talking about it. That seems weird to
Yeah,
me.
I mean, Christina Pushaw is a literally a foreign agent, and
Yeah.
registered as one.
Yeah. Had to.
She was
Yeah.
a propagandist for the ex-president of Georgia,
Yeah.
not the U.S. Georgia, the other one,
Mm-hmm.
um, and was one of the people is one of the people who's been pushing fascist propaganda and
Yeah.
running around trolling and deplatforming people on Twitter, which is a whole
Yeah.
other story.
Right. So, to your hellscape, though, I want to point one thing out that I'd like to leave with. I did a massive thread on climate crises a few years ago. And in one of them, I wrote, oil in its various forms used to win wars. Now it causes wars, cancer, climate change, extinction. It has another ill side effect. It spawns dictators. The oil curse, how black gold makes countries more authoritarian, corrupt, and violent. When I wrote that, I thought America had to be exempt from that it was other countries where you could see
Nope.
that having oil made them more authoritarian, corrupt, and violent. I must question where we stand on that.
Oh yeah, no. The oil and gas industry in the United States is obviously fucking enormous, right?
Yeah.
And that is where still the vast majority of the sort of corporate profits get made, and it's why it's so existential to so many people. And it's also why it's so easily weaponized, is because there's a shitload of greedy people and running oil and gas, including one Mr. Vladimir Putin, which is not at all a coincidence.
No, it is not. And I think a lot of our push toward authoritarianism falls right in this. We're talking about exactly this black gold oil curse. This is all part of it. Well, I thank you very much for that very brilliant hellscape. We're going to keep our eye on all these characters. I hope that what Flynn was signaling, that he may be the target, as he was trying to sort of garner sympathy, means that we will see some activity related to him as far as our federal agencies go. So
Yeah, I think Flinny got a door knock, and we're gonna hear about that soon. Just a guess.
okay,
We'll see.
okay. Well, okay. So
Mm.
before we introduce our guest, there is a clip that I would like to show our viewers. We think it's very important that we let Jason van Tatenhove speak for himself as he spoke to the world, and then we can't wait to hear from him. So, can you show that clip, Hi-Fi?
I, I think we need to quit mincing words and just talk about truths. And what it was going to be was an armed revolution. I mean, people died that day. Law enforcement officers died this day. There was a gallows set up in front of the Capitol. This could have been the spark that started a new civil war, and no one would have won there. That would have been good for no one.
OMG, we are so excited that Jason van Tatenhove has joined us on RadPod. And of course, our viewers know Jason from his appearance in front of the January 6th committee, which is for me one of the most lingering moments, not only because you were wearing a Descendant shirt, but from what you said, you didn't mince words. You let people know that this was the intent was a violent revolution. And Jason, your journey has been really fascinating. And quite frankly, people like you are the reason that we do this show. We do a show that's an investigative show on disinformation and radicalization. And we are trying every single week to figure out ways that we can be useful and help de-radicalize people. So please, can you give us our viewers a little snapshot of who you are and how you came to be the publicist with the Oath Keepers and how you got out?
Sure. It was, I've been out of the game for about 15 years. And really it all kind of started right around the Bundy Ranch era. I'll freely admit that I was watching a whole lot of, conspiracy theory based stuff. And, I've always had a genuine, healthy distrust of the government. That's certainly, I think that is something that a lot of us kind of share. But, it's easy once you start drinking the conspiracy theory Kool-Aid to just go down some deeper rabbit holes. And I think that's part of what we're seeing in action these days, really, with what's happening with almost half the country. I don't know what the numbers are, but there's a whole lot of people that really have kind of drank in the same Kool-Aid. And so, I was just covering, I was always kind of a DIY journalist. At the time I was doing some talk radio spots for Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And, I just saw that Bundy Ranch was happening, and I knew that there was something historic happening there, that there's something big. And I grew up mostly in the Colorado Front Range, up near Fort Collins, which is where CSU, Colorado State University, is. So, I would watch a lot of these independent documentaries that would come through, and a lot of them before that period of time, kind of in my formational years, were about Ruby Ridge and Waco and just what had happened there. And I think part of why we saw such a large organic uprising happening there at Bundy Ranch was people, the rumors were out there that there were sniper teams out in the hills, and this was going to be another Waco. And, people just did not want to see that. Now, I think it got hijacked and, really was used for other purposes, especially kind of the momentum that was built at Bundy Ranch. And that led all the way to, the steps of the Capitol building on January 6th. So, I went out there and was covering things. I got embedded. It was Easter weekend. I reached out to some contacts that I had, because I kind of did a social engineering experiment up in northern Colorado, where having tattoos everywhere. I've been in the tattoo industry forever as well. I've had a lot of people tell me, well, you can't do this or that because you've got tattoos everywhere. And so I'm always taking that as a challenge. And I had some connections into the kind of the right-wing politics, local politics in northern Colorado. So I made some calls to some of my connections there. And by the end of the day, I was embedded in with Stuart Rhodes as he was going down for the second half of the Bundy Ranch. So I went there, I covered it for Revolution Radio. Stuart felt my coverage was, somewhat okay, because he invited me back to the Sugar Pine Mine standoff when that happened up in the Pacific Northwest, and then again at the Lincoln County White Hope Mine incident that happened up in Montana, Lincoln County, Montana. At that point, I had helped them with a press release, and because they had a so-called public information officer that really had no idea what she was doing, and they just needed help with basic organization of a thing. I was like, all right, I'll do it, but don't put my name on it. Of course they put my name on it. So, it is what it is. And I was, at the time, I had a day job working for the state of Montana as a Department of Livestock employee. And of course, I got a call like 6 a.m. the next morning from my bureau chief, like screaming at me about how my name was like in every newspaper in the world right now. And,
Wow.
Associated with this extremist group. So, Stuart at that point, and it's not an easy thing when you're 6 foot tall, you got a mohawk, tattoos everywhere up in Northwest Montana, necessarily get a job. especially in the creative fields. So I was offered a job by Stewart, and I kind of had these initial notions that I was going to write my own Hunter S. Thompson's Hell's Angels. Hunter S. Thompson is someone that was very influential to me, and that's kind of what I went into it with. Now I got swept up and definitely drank the Kool-Aid a lot more than I would care to admit, but I did, and I've got to own that. And so, and I worked with them for about a year and a half.
And you,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, and you have been owning it, and I think that's what's critically important. And what's also very important to me is into the mix, because that is your background, being a writer. And I think that's I think that's going to be important as historic record goes, because you were able to document and honestly put together what is a real recent history of the evolution of that movement. And I think those tentacles are very important. So you're in it a year and a half, and then
in it a year and a half, and during that period of time, I saw how that radicalization process really happened. I was working with Stuart Rhodes, on a daily, if not, every other day type basis. I was traveling all over the country with them. It was my job to create propaganda that they use. I saw how they weaponized kind of the flow of information or misinformation, and took it and would spin it to their own side of things. And I mean, that was literally the job description. I'd wake up, see what was hot in the conspiracy realms, checking out Drudge Report, see what's on InfoWars, see what's on Natural News, and find stories that we could take and plug the Oath Keepers messaging into. And then, write stories about them, do videos, but also work as kind of a press liaison between Stuart Rhodes and any media appearances that he might do. So I got a really good inside view, and there have been a few books written about the Oath Keepers, but it's always kind of academics writing from the perspective of their ivory tower, whereas this is and granted, I'm a hack writer. I've always been a hack writer, but hacks do pretty good over time. And so I've got this inside perspective, that I'm writing the book right now. It's coming out in February, but I'm just finishing it up now, and should have it too. My publisher Skyhorse is publishing it, and it's already getting a lot of attention. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, the only one that can fuck it up at this point is me. So
the one thing I want to say before the guys jump in here is that one of the things that we were talking about before the interview was how during the New Deal, there was funding for writers, there were funding for playwrights, and Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman was supported. Writers like me, independent investigative journalists, we have to literally rely on the support of the kindness of strangers, because they don't really, there's no place for the true independence anymore like there used to be. Hunter S. Thompson wouldn't have a home anymore unless he became alt-right and went to Breitbart. It's a very sad truth, but I think we can agree with that. And you mentioned that your grandfather.
Yeah, he was part of the New Deal art projects out of New York City, back in the day. Are we glitching out here?
I think
Jump in because
we're losing you a little bit, Heidi. There we go.
I can hear you. Let me just make sure I'm on the right Wi-Fi. Okay, good, great. I can always pause and cut this out. Is everybody cool? We can all hear each other?
No, we're
Jim,
good. We're good.
Why don't you jump in? Good. Jim, jump in.
Yeah, we'll do. First of all, listen, I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. I know how fucking hard it is to put yourself out there like you have, especially on international television, and admit to some things that are painful to you, and I'm just here to say thank you for that. It is probably the most important thing that people can see, right? Is that this alternate reality that they've been sucked into, and that's one of the things I want to talk to you about, is not permanent. You don't have to stay there. And there are people who were deeply involved in it ideologically, you know, who over time had gotten into that movement, and can get out anyway. And it's just very, very good to have you on the show and to have you out there, you know, speaking the truth about this.
Well,
so
I
just
think,
wanted to say that.
well, thank you. I think it's really important. I think it's vitally important right now for the future of our country, because so many people have been kind of swept up in it, that we've got to demonstrate that there are ways back to kind of a sense of normalcy and a return to who we were before we did get swept up. I think that exit ramp and just looking at what it's going to truly take to kind of get back to that with a larger population that has been swept up like they have, you know, once they kind of come back to their senses and are shaken back to reality, we need to offer them ways back. Because otherwise, I mean, this division, if it continues the way it is right now, I mean, look at what's been happening just over the weekend with, you know, the threats against law enforcement and everything else after, you know, a duly executed, you know, search warrant for some very serious issues. And we have people that are, you know, crashing, setting their cars on fire and crashing into Capitol barricades. We have people, literally 2 people have died just this weekend over, you know, the FBI office in, what was it, Ohio?
It was Cincinnati, yeah.
Cincinnati, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those are real tangible things that are happening to real people. And, you know, we've got to look at that and we've got to come to our senses. And we've also got to figure out ways to kind of let people come back. And I think that's really where we are right now. I do a lot of work with, I've been doing a speaking tour with Georgetown Law's ICAP, which is their constitutional advocacy and protection kind of outreach nonprofit, and doing work with Mary McCord, who used to be a acting attorney general for national security. And she's now heading up Georgetown Law's ICAP. And, you know, part of what we're doing is talking about some of these strategies that we might be able to come up with for getting back, or at least getting to a better place than we are now. And so, you know, we're talking like that, talking about these types of things with, you know, different nonprofits and whatnot, and just trying to figure out ways to get to a better place.
Yeah, one of the things that you talk about a lot is, I mean, you are literally, you said this yourself, a propagandist, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you to create disinformation for others, and for me that's very interesting, because I think in order to allow most people to kind of escape the alternate reality they're in, they need space from the propaganda that they're being bathed in all the time, right? So one of the things that I look at are, you know, things like Telegram, right, which are hundreds of millions of people who are just sort of getting bathed in this poison and this disinformation. And I was just curious what your thoughts are about that, about you know, how propaganda works to just sort of over time coerce people into this alternate reality, and once they're in, it's hard to get out unless you stop the disinformation.
It really, I you know, there was a time in my life where I was addicted to heroin. It was a short period of time, and I went and got help, and, you know, before my daughters were born, right as my daughter was getting born, and I link into that. It's very much like an addiction. And actually, I'm not going to say who it's with, but right now I'm working with some producers at a major cable network, to working on a possible series that we're putting together, a treatment for, that digs into this whole conspiracy theory propaganda side of things, because it really is one of the ways. I mean, and unfortunately, social media has really become a blast furnace when it comes to this type of conspiracy theory radicalization. You know, and it's just been this perfect storm coming together. And it can start something as innocuous as, hey, I've got a healthy distrust of the government. And
Right.
starting with that,
Yeah.
it can quickly radicalize to where, you know, then with my time with the Oath Keepers, the reason I left the Oath Keepers was because I saw, and I'm someone that, you know, I come from a very leftist family. You know, my grandfather was part of the abstract expressionists in New York City, you know, very bohemian artist
Yep.
lifestyle. You know, I've got handwritten letters that Martin Luther King had sent to my grandmother. You know, and if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it's just,
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about is it seems like Stewart himself was not necessarily a white supremacist to start. That it was as you said, it was very much anti-government. It was, you know, the sort of Ron Paul liberty movement kind of that went on back,
yeah,
you know, around
it
a
was
decade
more of
ago,
like an
right?
anarchist libertarian mindset
Exactly.
that it
Yeah.
started with, but incrementally it started with, you know, with Richard Spencer, with
Yeah.
the terming of the alt-right. And, you know, with each of these standoffs that Stewart took part in, that he organized and, you know, did these calls to action for, he found that with each one, the more radical he went, the more money he was able to raise. And this is all my opinion. I've got to be careful about that because he's
Well, you
calling
are
on every Oath
entitled to
Keeper
it,
to
though.
sue me at this point.
Yeah, I know.
But it's my opinion that, you know, he found a way to capture a lot more camera time, a way to kind of feed his ego and these dreams of becoming this clandestine paramilitary leader. And unfortunately, Trump kind of brought a certain amount of authenticity to that, and that kind of led to where we were in January. But you know, each time, you know, after White Hope Mine happened, you know, that's when we kind of saw what was happening with Ferguson and the Patriot Prayer groups in the Pacific Northwest, and kind of that those original Proud Boys coming up in the scene. And they would network together. Now, oftentimes it resulted in pissing matches where, you know, Stewart wasn't on Alex Jones's show for years because they got into a dick measuring contest at the Alamo. And, you know, but as soon as they kind of saw something that they could unite together on and further both their agendas, all that goes out the window. And we got to keep that in mind. But, you know, so I had private conversations with Stewart where I don't think he is racist. You know, I'm someone who's openly queer. I wasn't back in the day, but that didn't change that I was queer. I just wasn't open about it. But, you know, I disclosed to him, look, I'm a queer person who is, you know, here. We had discussions about how he would love to, you know, go protect a gay couple with their pot farm. Now, granted, I think looking back now, I think he was just telling me kind of what I wanted to hear. You know, he would often talk about how his mother had come from Mexico up into the agricultural fields in southern Nevada and California, and he would travel with her to these different camps. So I think at his heart, Stewart is not a racist or homophobic person. I think he just has no moral anchor. And wherever the most attention and funding is potentially there, that's where he's going to go. And unfortunately, that means in today's climate that it's going to radicalize further and further to the right there.
That's right. And I think the funding issue is a critical thing. And Hi-Fi, did you want to address that? Because clearly, if artists and writers and musicians could get paid, a lot fewer of them would get sucked into these pipelines. There's profit to it, you know, that happens for people as well. Hi-Fi?
Yeah. So where, I guess I have two questions, and one is about the pipeline of money. Like, where did that really come from? I find it hard to believe, with all the financial strife that's been happening over the last 4 or 5 years. You got the pandemic, everything that happened. All these people had money to go to January 6th, right? There seemed to be a lot of fundraising going on, but I'm not sure the fundraising was legitimate. It seems like there was money funneled there.
I can't really speak to current processes that happened before the Capitol, because I mean, when I left 5 years ago, I cut all ties. I just purged it of my life, really, and just started doing my own thing. But what I can talk about is how the funding kind of happened in the initial phases that I was able to witness. And that really, these call outs, when he calls people out to Bundy Ranch, there really aren't that many oath keeper, card carrying oath keepers that show up for these things. But what it does, and he's very good at spinning the optics to make it look like there's a lot more there than actually are. But what does happen is he also, if you go back and look at all the old releases and stuff, you'll notice he always is sure to add, if you can't make it, if you can't come eat the tip of the spear, you can do your part by donating. Yes. And it actually, a lot of money, like I remember being down at Bundy Ranch and him talking about how he made $30,000 to $40,000, of which the Bundy family were only ever given about $11,000 of. And that's in a 1 week's time. Now, I'll be the first to say Stewart didn't live a grandiose life like Trump does. He was always in beat up old cars. I mean, the guy lived in my basement for months when his wife kicked him out. So, and I've lived the archetypal artist, creative lifestyle my whole life. So we don't have much money, we're good old school poor in that we know how to survive on nothing. So, but it did provide a means for him to live, subsist on a certain lifestyle, which was, being able to travel wherever he wanted. He really had a liking for steaks at Applebee's or wherever, and it just provided a certain lifestyle where you basically, not have to have a real job, could just sit down, in my basement in his underwear, writing and, doing his rants. Right. But, it wasn't all that grandiose, but I think more than anything, it also fed his ego. I think he was very ego driven. And unfortunately, again, and we see that I think Alex Jones was much, much more successful with his different endeavors. But the original working title of my book was The Propagandist Selling the Revolution. And, that's really what he was doing. He was selling this notion of a armed, violent revolution to kind of perpetrate this lifestyle of his.
Wow. I'm just pausing because I'm just like, that is a mouthful. I would love for you to share with our viewers. I have a couple more questions and I know we don't have a lot of time. How the January 6th testimony came about, because that was a really critical moment for the nation and for the world.
Yeah. I still don't quite understand why out of everyone, they wanted me, but they did. And there really is no guidebook to navigating something like, a historic congressional event like that. So it all started, since I had left the Oath Keepers, and I will say this, that I made more money working for the Oath Keepers than I ever did working for legitimate media. I went and started writing for local newspaper and different magazines, freelancing and whatnot, after my time with the Oath Keepers. And, I was paid much better and much more consistently than I was, working for Alden. So, that's part of the factoring too. So while I was doing my, journalism work for local newspaper in the mountain resort town that I live in, I wound up interviewing a gal who's she's got, I don't know, like 17 New York Times bestselling titles that she has written herself, and she has an literary agency. And we connected, and I told her about this story and how someday I wanted to write about it and how I had, intended to previously. And she took me on as a writer. And unfortunately, so when I left the Oath Keepers, I started doing my own kind of karmic retribution, I guess you could say, to try to make up for what I, the words and the influence that I helped to spread. And I started with doing first responder work. I worked for the Forest Service as a fire line qualified EMT. I worked outside Glacier National Park with a volunteer ambulance service, and then with the Can-Am search and rescue team. And then I had some pretty severe injuries to my ankles, and moved back to Colorado, and started writing. And I figured, I've kind of always lived my life that I was going to live my life in a way that I had lots of really great stories to write about when I was old and feeble. And it's just, I'm becoming feeble a little earlier than I had hoped. But so she called me up one day. She's like, look, Jason, I had been working for years since the time I left behind the scenes, kind of have a stable of top shelf journalists that I have worked with, always off the record. And I was very specific about that because I didn't want my name associated anymore. I just wanted to be done with it. But I knew that there would be a time that my story might be important. Just the inside vantage that I had. So she calls up and she's like, look, Jason, you got to start letting them attribute some of this information to you. And it all started, I think it was September of just before January of this year. So it was September of last year. It was a Washington Post article that I let the author use my name in. And that just set off an avalanche that I just am still wrapping my brain around. Wow. That led to the Hulu documentary, Homegrown from Standoff to Rebellion. And I wound up, a clip of that was on Good Morning America. I was on Nightline a couple times. And of course, once the Hulu documentary came out and, the national press coverage came out, 6 a.m. the next morning, I had a call, and I have an unlisted number that I change pretty often. It's just a smart thing to do in a position like mine. So, they had no problem finding my number, and it was the January 6th Select Committee's one of their lead investigators saying, hey, we'd really like to talk to you. And of course, I had no fucking idea what I was doing with that, and it's not like you can really say no to it because they're going to talk to you one way or the other. And I wanted to do my part to speak truth to what I feel is really happening there.
And you did.
So I reached out to Mary, and she helped hook me up with just a rock star attorney team that I felt comfortable. And I was a voluntary witness the whole time. I did, I want to say four interviews before the actual hearing. One was off record, and I guess it was three actually, because it was one off record and then two on record. One was via Zoom, and the third one I went to DC and went into one of the congressional office buildings, the videos you saw up on the big screen in one of those offices. And then they're like, we think we're actually going to use you because, I didn't think, they had 1,000 people they were interviewing. Why would they want the guy with tattoos on his face? And I was very specific, telling them, like, look, the way I talk, I swear a lot. That's just how I express myself. And once I saw the first hearing, I was like, oh shit, everyone's swearing. Like,
yeah, fucking Bill Barr's out there swearing.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. So but it made it a lot more comfortable. And then the hearing itself was just a very surreal experience. Not quite as surreal as like going through the airport right afterwards. And the massive media blitz. At one point in time, there were 3 studio vans just shuttling in, like moving them in and out from all I was on Anderson Cooper, everything. I did an hour-long interview with the biggest news channel out of Japan.
Great.
So, it was just such a surreal, bizarre experience, and really just trying to like deer in the headlights, not just choke and try to get my words out as best I could so that that story could come out. So that's how it all unfolded. You
did not choke. You said the words that we'd been yearning to hear, that this is a violent militia group and that this was supposed to be a violent revolution. And you've said repeatedly subsequently that you are grateful that it wasn't worse. And I think that's very important for the world to hear. And also looking at what is occurring now in real time. We've had quite a big week. You identified a few examples of what stochastic terrorism ultimately reaps. And what do you see right now and moving forward? What is the urgency that you would like people to know about?
I think we really have to hold to account the major players here, because this is now normalized things in a way that just is, if they get away with this scot-free, like we've seen happen time and time again with the Bundys and, you know, leadership in these different groups who, you know, have encouraged people to go do stupid things on their behalf, but they're the only ones smart enough not to do it, and then, you know, abandon them. It encourages them to continue, and the rate of escalation that we've seen from Bundy Ranch to January 6th has just been exponential. Where do we go from, you know, an active rebellion, a coup attempt, violent coup attempt, where they even had a gallows set up for their own guy, for the vice president. Right. He was on their side. You know, if they're willing to turn that quickly on the vice president, I think that's a very dramatic example of just what dire straits we're in. And I've said it a lot. Like, I really feel we've been just incredibly lucky with the minimal bloodshed we've seen compared to what it could have been. And luck just at this point is not a survival strategy that we can no longer rely on. We've got to take some real action and really start talking about what's happening. But now we've got politicians, you know, in Colorado here, we have Laura Boebert and, you know, all these kind of new generation of people that have been directly influenced by Trump that are now in positions of power.
Yeah.
We are we're almost at the Rubicon where, you know, once we pass it, there's no more putting it back into Pandora's box. And I think we're right there right now, that we either decide to hold these people to account and see some real actual legal consequences, or all bets are off.
Amen.
Amen,
There you
man.
go.
Hell yeah. I have a couple things. I know you guys have a couple things. Jeff, 5 more minutes for us?
Yeah. We're good for now.
Okay, you're the best.
Haven't started rebelling yet.
Okay, you're the best. How do we de-radicalize people en masse? And if you just want to give a line or two, that way we can get a few more thoughts in.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no quick fix. There isn't. You know, I look at just the power of storytelling, the power of art, and music. I think these are all things we need to think of using. And I think there's a good, I mean, if we look at the polling numbers for Trump pre-select committee to where they are now, I think we have seen a difference. I don't know if it's fluctuated or not, but I think we are beginning to see a difference. And just speaking the truth again and again, using some of these same techniques that have been used to distort the truth. You know, and good propaganda always takes a seed of truth and wraps this craziness around it, right? So that's kind of what makes it more palatable in the beginning. And then once you've got a taste for it, then all bets are off. Then you're talking about, you know, cabals of shape-shifting lizard people.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
one of the phrases I like is, you know, although it sounds bad, is white propaganda, which just means propaganda which is true and you know where it's coming from.
Right.
But it's deployed in an organized and you know, effective way.
Well,
And,
I mean, these
you
techniques,
know, in some ways that's what we need.
Yeah.
Yes.
And these techniques work. It was Freud's cousin that wrote the book Propaganda, that, you know, the madmen of the 50s, the advertising firms in New York City used so extensively and so effectively. Right. We need to be using some of those techniques ourselves. I mean, but that may be a Pandora's box in and of itself. I mean, we just got to get back to truth. And unfortunately, we've lost a lot of the credibility that, you know, mainstream journalism used to have, as they try to compete on a 24-hour news cycle and the consolidation of these media companies. You know, I just come back to good
the
storytelling.
media has also been systematically attacked, right?
Yes.
something that fascists and authoritarians always do, right? They always go after the media because that is the source of sort of community truth that people rely on, and if that gets taken away from you as the source of truth, then you're open to all this other stuff.
Yeah, we really don't have that safe harbor anymore that people used to see institutions like the New York Times as
Yes.
being.
Yes.
So I unfortunately, it's a really hard problem we're at, and I don't know if we're going to figure it out in time. I hope we do. I mean, for the sake of my children and my grandchildren, I really hope we do. And that's one of the reasons why I've been so committed to trying to do what I can to help. But we're just in a very scary time right now.
Yes, indeed.
Agreed.
But history, I think, plays a part too. And I spent the day before my appearance before the committee in Washington, D.C., and my cousin had come out there. And the reason I left, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was I had walked into a conversation that was happening at a local grocery store up where I lived in the Eureka, Montana area. And there was a core member of Oath Keepers leadership there, along with some associates that were having an open discussion at the deli there at the grocery store, where kind of everyone gathered at the end of the day and just kind of chewed the shit and talked. And I walked into a conversation where they were literally denying that the Holocaust had happened. And that shook me to the point that I went straight home and called a family meeting. And again, I've said it before, like we are not, rich by any means. We were surviving, and then with being paid as I was with the Oath Keepers. And then if it was going to cause, economic hardship for the family, we just couldn't keep going down this path. It just was not a place I could go to. So that's when I put in my resignation and walked away. And that was good timing, because that's when we really saw that kind of hard right radicalization begin to happen and manifest.
Yeah. Well, we are so glad you did. And when you shared that story at the hearing, I just knew it to be true. There was no doubt in my mind that was your story, because I worked for Fox 11 in LA for 15 years. Jim helped create alternate reality gaming, which has now been weaponized. Hi-Fi used to be a troll and has, used his powers for good. And we all have our stories. And I knew when you said that was your story, and that was legit.
Well, so the gal that came with me to the hearing, you see her in the background wearing one of my Keanu Reeves t-shirts. And that's Sarah. And so she's not blood family, but she's family. I mean, she's closer than some blood family. But her mother had married into our family, and they come from they're Jewish. So we used to do, mixed Christmas, Hanukkah holidays when I was a kid. And, they were very much a part of my being raised. And we actually spent the day before we went into the hearing at the National Holocaust Museum. And just seeing that history, I remember just going through and seeing some of the facial expressions of those SS or Hitler Youth folks, and kind of almost a sarcastic smirk. And I realized, like, I've seen these faces before. It may not be the exact same faces, but the look in the eye, that kind of sneer and laugh, it was the same people I had seen more and more at these rallies that were happening. And it's just I feel like we're at a point in time where if we don't remember history, we're doomed to relive it. And that was a very profound moment for me.
Wow, thank you for that, man.
This is a very profound interview. This is the part where we ask our guests to please come back and do a part 2 at some point. There are so many other things that we would like to talk to you about. I'd love to know what truth means to you, where you find peace, what you told your children, And I'm sure those are things that, you probably love to talk about, hopefully on another episode, unless you have one.
I mean, absolutely. I'll be happy to come back on. I will say that I am at this point in time extremely busy. So after the book comes out and the media push after that, and we're looking at jumping right into a possible docu-series. Again, kind of delving into conspiracy. The whole premise of it is delving into these conspiracy theories that are so prevalent right now, and really talking about what the belief is, talking to people that are fully in that belief system currently, but then going and talking to actual experts and really kind of digging into what the truth of it is. So
wow,
we'll see if it happens.
Sounds like Mythbusters, but for conspiracies.
Yeah.
Yes, nice. Is there one last line that you can leave our friends with? We have a global reach. Is there anything that you would like to put out there?
Yeah, here's what I want to say is we need to be patient. We need to have patience with the people like me who had drank the Kool-Aid and now maybe are being shaken back to themselves. And realizing, oh shit, because when I was there, I dressed differently. I started to talk differently. You kind of become this alternate persona. And part of the reasons, like I told the select committee, like I'm just going to wear the clothes I wear every day, is because I was returning to who I was, and that to me symbolically was very important, even if it meant that the descendants are pissed off at me for a bit. Like, that's okay. I actually did an open letter to my heroes and explained it. But I think we need to be patient. And again, this kind of comes from my cousin. We were talking about Ayers, the guy who had testified alongside of me, and how it sounded like he really wasn't all that serious about it. The wording he used was, I kind of don't think it anymore. But my cousin and we were in a group talking afterwards, and we were kind of like, people started, and myself included, started kind of quipping at him like, well, maybe he is disingenuous, maybe he's just doing this to get out. But then my cousin was like, wait, stop. This is a lot like cult deprogramming. Yeah. And that's not something that happens overnight. That's right. a gradual process where you have to disengage and put that space and time in and reprogram how your brain was thinking back to kind of where you were. And that's something that takes time. So I think we really need to look at maybe some of the cult deprogramming, psychological techniques that are being used or have been used to success. But more than anything, we've got to be patient with people that are beginning to come back to normalcy and reality, that it's not going to just happen. It's not a light switch that you turn on and off. It's a gradual process getting there, and it's in a longer process coming back, I think. So we just have to be patient with people and reconnect on a human level. Like, we've just lost human connection between this political divide. And we've kind of lost just being able to talk to people. If they have a differing political belief, we're just dehumanizing them on both sides. And I think we need to get back to real human conversations and, treating people like human beings again.
Could not agree more, man. And speaking of conversations, thank you so much for this one, man. And when your book comes out, we hope to be part of your tour.
Yes, we do.
We'd love to promote the shit out of it, and anything else you do. Really grateful you were here.
We have a lot of smart viewers, and they like to buy books. And we talk a lot about what you just talked about. We're trying to start talking about digital empathy. We're trying to start talking about decompression models, where that's like the balloon air being released slowly as we bring people back. I'm a big believer we should not be making fun of people. I see a lot of that online. That is not going to earn the trust of people coming back. So everything you said. I catch
myself doing it every day. We all got to catch ourselves. Like, none of us are perfect in this. We all fuck up. We're human beings. It's what we do best. So we just need to figure out how to fuck up with a little more grace, I guess. I don't know.
There you go.
That's it. That's
Thank
our
you, ma'am.
show. Wow. Jason van Tatenhove, thank you so very much for being here. And please do come back.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
you. Thanks again.
All right. That is our show. Thank you so much for joining us. And wow, we all have a lot to think about. Thanks. Peace out.